And thanks for joining. I'm going to talk about NEWT on FHIR, the newborn weight tool, reducing the need for non-preventive healthcare utilization in the first month of life. And if, like me, you don't have a medical background, you may not know exactly what that means just yet, but that's okay. We'll explain it. First, who am I? My name is Meeks. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at UCSF. I've been there for over a dozen years. I'm very much a hands-on technologist. I write code, I enjoy writing code, and I sort of get involved in everything technical the CTSI does there, and I love it. This is the title slide that I really wanted. NEWT on FHIR, what is NEWT on FHIR? More simply, it's a tool to protect newborns. And the best way to show that tool is to start by showing NEWT not on FHIR, or as anybody else would call it, NEWT. So we're going to do that right now. So here we are at newbornweight.org. It's a public website. Anybody can go to it for the NEWT tool. The best explanation of this is down here. It's a tool for pediatric healthcare where you plug in health data, weight data for a newborn, and it lets you know whether or not there's an issue with weight loss or weight gain in the newborn. What I love about this is right on the homepage, it's a call to action where they ask you to hand enter the data about the newborn. And of course, that's great as a backup, but in this day and age, come on, we shouldn't have to hand enter data. Anyone at a FHIR conference should know that. There should be an automatic way to get that in there. But before we get into that, a quick demo to show more specifically how the tool works. Here's an example where we're looking at a newborn baby about 3 days old, and the data that's needed to sort of produce this graph. Not much data is needed. The birth type, the feeding type, and a handful of weight observations, in this case for the birth time and weight, and then a couple of subsequent ones. And as you can see, for this particular child, they're losing weight. That's not unusual. But the fact that they're still so close to this green line on the nomogram here lets us know that this child is still doing okay. No need to worry yet. Hopefully the next reading will start to tick up, as is normally the case. However, if these dots were a little bit lower and we're close to this red line, that's a concern, in which case you want to do something. Hopefully just supplementing the feeding to bring things back on track, but in a more severe case, put the child on an IV. A little bit more about this website and how it came to be. It's a joint effort by Penn State Health and a few others, including UCSF, where I work. A lot of great research went into this, and a lot of great technical underpinnings as well. Valerie Flatterman is someone that I've worked with a couple of other projects that we do. Again, hand entering the data, that's a silly thing to have to do. They know that. And so if you click this EMR tab, they do talk about, well, if you want to plug this into your EHR, you can do that by hiring a developer and following these instructions. And it's pretty simple. The data they need isn't much. It's a single API call. You pass in the parameters, but still, you have to have a developer to do this that knows where to grab this data. And when I first saw that, I'm like, well, that makes sense. I like that you can hand enter the data. I like that you can sort of code your own solution. But they're really, this is begging for a smart on FHIR solution so you can just plug it in without a developer. I actually emailed them saying, I assume somebody's working on a smart on FHIR version of that. I'd be curious to find out more about that. They saw that the email came from someone at UCSF. And they sort of panicked because they wrote back saying, wait, we thought you guys were already integrating this into your EHR, and we are, but we're doing it in a way that's completely custom to us. It's a very slick integration, but not remotely shareable. And I didn't like that, so there was a sort of brouhaha about that. I said, well, Smart on FHIR would be great because then anybody could use it. And they said, okay, fine. And that's why I'm here, because I sort of ended up volunteering myself to make that happen. And so I'm going to talk about that as well as some of the challenges in making that real. So yes, the challenges range from things that were sort of unique and surprising for the problem we were trying to solve, to some more sort of general problems, to some that I think are specific to UCSF That's what I hope stay that way, but they probably aren't. Other institutions probably have similar problems. Challenges were very real. Technical complexity was not one of them. The NEWT website is very fancy and sophisticated. The EHR is as well, but the Smart on Fire glue to put these things together, which I'm responsible for, that's not hard at all, thankfully. There certainly were challenges. To start, oddly enough, some of the data we want, it isn't really out there in a standard way. Birth time in particular, birth weight you can find pretty easily, but different folks store the birth time in different ways. It's not standard across EHRs, even for a given vendor, not a part of the FHIR standard, only available via extension, and it's something we need. Feeding method and birth type, again, some pieces of data, but they just aren't available in a standard way. And there are ways to address this. So one is with our vendor, when you launch a Smart on Fire app, you can add initial launch parameters so that are available with the app. So it might be that sometimes we can't FHIR and find this data through the FHIR API. So just pass it in as a launch parameter if you can find it, and we'll use it. And even if you can't do that, we can just have the app maybe have a checkbox for the feeding method and birth type, so that so you can just click it right there. And it's silly to have to do that, but fortunately, the hardest part of the data entry is all those weight measurements. That actually is pretty standard, although the first weight isn't necessarily going to be the birth time weight, so a little bit of issues there. Next, yeah, finding newborn test data was realistic newborn test data was surprisingly hard to find. There are a couple of sandboxes out there with fake patients that were available to me. I found one called Logica Health out there on the web where you can generate your own patient. I generated a baby and put in the data, and of course it worked perfectly, but it wasn't very comforting to me to know that my app works perfectly with data that I hand feed it. I want to see it with realistic data. Our vendor has a sandbox where you can go and test apps. Most of the patients they had in that sandbox were fake people my age and older. I found some teenagers and preteens, I think even a 2-year-old, but nothing remotely close to a newborn. So that was a bit of a problem. With a DevOps environment, you could solve that by making sure that we generate a bunch of fake data. There's a bunch of babies there, but it's hard to do DevOps with our EHR. These EHR systems tend to be enterprise systems, fairly, very stable, not very agile necessarily. In the end, what I decided to do was to demo it in our vendor sandbox, load up a teenager, and then have a button that's swap out this teenager's data with baby data, and I'll show that. And it seems like a silly thing to do, but by doing that, I was actually able to sell people on the feasibility of what we're doing. So I'm going to show that now. So here we are. I'm logged into our vendor sandbox where I registered the NEWT on Fire app. I'll click that. I've already selected a patient that I think was a teenager. I'm sure in production we'll make this icon a little smaller. But here it is. And these are the observations for that particular patient. They're nowhere close to what a newborn's data would look like. So I have this baby button here. And I do that, and it swaps in sort of more baby-like data. Click submit, and this is where the data actually goes out to the Penn State API and comes back, and boom, there's the nomogram. We have three weight readings here, and you can see that for this particular child, they're doing okay. They're on the green line. It's still very early, so who knows? But and as goofy as it was to sort of put this together with sort of fake this button here. This is what actually sold people that, hey, Smart on Fire actually can work for this, which is why we're now working to get this out there. And I actually literally want to show the source code behind this. Also, my hands-on technologist. This is 140 lines of code. This thing is so simple, and the most complicated part of that application was actually building that little button to swap in fake data. The production version of this thing is probably going to be less than 100 lines of code. So, this is easy to do because the magic is happening at Penn State and the magic is happening in the EHR. Get back to some other challenges, and these are sort of generic, but I know free software is like a free puppy. You know, people are intimidated by our clinicians. Clinics can be very intimidated by anything with technical lift. And so the more you can lower that, the better. And I can't really stress that enough. You know, I want this thing to be a simple Smart on Fire app that anybody can install and get out there, even if they don't have technical resources. A lot of times when we're talking to people about this, you know, we're talking to clinicians, not technologists, and they just don't have a budget to bring in a developer for that. So we gotta take that into account. So we're doing what we can now to sort of get this out there. We're gonna try and get it installed at the other UCs, which I know they trust us. We can work with them pretty easily. Our EHR vendor has like an app store where you can put apps out there. We're going to put this out there for anybody to download. It's going to be free, of course. There'll be instructions on, you know, if you have some of the data, like the feeding method over here, you know, you can pass it as a launch parameter. We'll explain how to configure that. So hopefully folks will get it up and running without needing a developer. And again, worst case scenario, just, you know, launch the app without that data and then click the box there. That's better than nothing. Sort of flip side of you know, the technical intimidation is security intimidation. And this actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, we are sending data out of our EHR, you know, across the internet and back, and people are nervous about that. Now, fortunately, this data isn't considered PHI because it's a thin slice of data. It's just the weight readings and the birth method and the feeding methods was just considered measurements. It's all HTTPS here anyway, but you know, I have two different security diagrams here, the one on the left and the one on the right, and the one on the left is not as good, and I'll explain why. So what we see on the one on the left, and the far left, you have your EHR, and the sort of upper right there is the newborn weight tool, which is the API, and then the lower right is whatever random web server or non-random web server that is hosting the Smart on Fire app. That's three boxes you got to worry about. We talked to Penn State and said, would you please host the Smart on Fire app on your web server? It just makes a lot of sense. And that way we can present the security review diagram on the right where there's just two boxes to worry about because the API and the source code for the Smart on Fire app are coming from the same place. And they agreed to do it. You know, the load on the server for hosting the app is going to be tiny. It's just static content. I'm quite sure my smartwatch could power the thing. And so, yeah, so that one's out. This another challenge here, this probably specific to UCSF, but you know, we have a couple of different flavors of NEWT out there now. Some real, some to be. The bottom right, NEWT on MuleSoft on Fire, we have that in production today and it works great, but it isn't remotely shareable. It's embedded inside some enterprise system that we have. Super clean integration, but you're not going to get anyone else to use it. Up in the upper left, Bridge is the system that actually was showcased last year by Erica Schleimer from UCSF at this conference, the very fancy Smart on Fire container app where you can plug in these widgets and we get a lot of mileage out of it. When I showed her NEWT on Fire, she's like, oh, I bet I can make a widget out of that. And like an hour later, she had made a widget out of that and plugged it in, and that works. And then finally in the lower left, Sharp is this vision of creating like a Smart on Fire environment that's specific for researchers so that like a non-technical researcher can cobble together an app. It's a great vision, but it's still very early stages. And, you know, people sort of want to use NEWT as a way to push that along. And I'm like, no. Let's just build a simple NEWT on Fire app that doesn't require anything other than Smart on Fire stuff and just get it out there so people can start benefiting from this today. And with that, yeah. 2x2 up and to the right is better. You don't even have to know what the axes are. In this case, there probably aren't any that would make any sense. If you want to contact me, hopefully to get this thing in your EHR, let's talk. It's not going to be hard to do. And special thanks to the team, Andrew Robinson. He's the one who actually built our MuleSoft implementation. He understands biomedicine a lot better than I do and knows our EHR really well. Alina helped put all this together. Jory, also an EHR expert. Nervin, a technologist who also was very good at creating graphics of NEWT on Fire. Those were all created by him. And finally me. And no salamanders were hurt in the creation of this presentation. There were no flaming dragons either, for those of you who can get that reference. And with that, we will go on to Q&A. So thanks for watching.
Thank you, Eric. I actually don't see any questions in the Q&A section of Whoova. Would anybody like to unmute and ask any questions?
Well, I'm here if you have questions. If not, that's fine too.
All right. Well, I guess you were just extremely thorough.
Well, I hope somebody wants this tool embedded. I mean, we know that we're seeing a lot of interest in it from clinicians that want to get the NEWT tool out there. This is important stuff. Without proper feeding, it can lead to dehydration. That's one of the leading causes of mortality in babies. So, important work, very technically simple, but that doesn't diminish the importance. If any of you do have any questions about it, you can hunt me down. I'm not hard to find, just Eric Meeks at UCSF, and the contact information is available through this Whoova app as well. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. The presentation will be posted here in a bit, and don't forget to rate the session. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks.